Hi sisters! Sorry, I've been watching a lot of James Charles lately. I just can't help it. What an interesting person. Anywho, welcome back to episode 7 of Indigenous. Why is this light so bright? And today, we are doing our best. The struggle has been so real this week for so many reasons. In this video, we are going to focus on Angola and Ethiopia and the third gendered terms used in these cultures pre-colonially. Really quick and brief overviews of third gender terms in these two countries, or at least what I could find. I could not make this series without including some of our African sisters and brothers. Now, if this is your first time joining us, welcome to Indigenous, a series where I explore Native and Indigenous genders around the world in an effort to show people that non-binary gender and transgenderism is not something that is new. It is not weird. It is not strange. It is something that has been around since the beginning of time, but is something that has been stigmatized and demonized by religions and Christianity and things like that in the modern day. What we aim to do in this series is to help our non-binary and transgender brothers and sisters get the respect they deserve, and also help to eliminate some of the discrimination that is created around the world through education. So this is me researching, reading, exploring about all of these cultures on my own, hopefully with the help of some of you. And before we begin, if you are learning English, I have a worksheet that goes along with this video. It's at the C1 level, roughly, focused on listening practice and vocabulary, so just email me if you want a copy of that. I will send you that worksheet and a separate document with the answers so you can check your work. And you can always email me if you have questions. Okay, so we're gonna start with Angola. And I know some of y'all mother need a map. Hit it, free iMovie cutaway graphics. Okay, so Angola is this country right here. Sub-Saharan Africa and southwest coast. And it's one of the few African countries that speaks Portuguese. Oh, hey colonization, sup? Now, thinking back to Africa in pre-colonial times, I believe Africa was divided into kingdoms. And in this area, when the Portuguese came, the Dongo Kingdom was in power. It was within this ethno-linguistic group. There was a third gender according to the spotty sources that I could find. Also, a side note, when I use the word ethno-linguistic, it's kind of a way to group people based on their culture, or the language they speak, and then the region from which they originate. So it's actually a very useful word. Say it with me, ethno-linguistic. It's like a piece of warm cheesecake. Ow. So when the Portuguese came, they recorded seeing same-sex relations, and what also threw them for a loop was they often saw queens in power. So before we go on, shout out to any cultures that have a lot of queens.
Hey, queen.
More of that, please.
Really, queen?
And these queens would have quite a few non-binary people within their courts and their inner circles. These people were referred to as chibados. Now, I don't know if chibado is a Portuguese term or a Dongo term. In a few articles, it actually looks like the term was quimbanda in the Dongo language, meaning that chibado is the Portuguese term, but TBH, it's kind of hard to tell because both of those look like they could be Portuguese terms. And your boy's knowledge of the Bantu languages in sub-Saharan Africa is not great. But yes, it does look like there was a non-binary gendered group of people who lived in pre-colonial Angola that were treated as shamans, and they had socio-political power, and they were highly respected. Except by the Portuguese. I do have an excerpt by Antonio de Oliveira Cardonega. I don't know if I said that right. Now, this is from 1681, but he said, among the people of Angola, there is much sodomy among men who pursue their dirty practices dressed like women. In the country's own language, In the country's own language, those who have relations among one another in this district are called quimbandas. Some among them are wizards who control everything and are esteemed by most of the people. Okay, so he's rude, but that gives us a little bit of context. Unfortunately, these old translated writings seem to be some of the only sources that we have out there besides oral histories, which I don't have access to. Alright, so let's move to Ethiopia and let's go to the map. And we are focusing on the Mali people of Western Ethiopia. Okay, this is where they are, right? And they're called the Mali people because that's the language they speak. All right, now let's switch to this map. Oh my gosh, I almost peed when I saw this map. It shows African language families by color, and then it shows the smaller individual languages by text. Have you ever seen anything so beautiful? I mean, besides this. JKs. But am I? Whoever made this map, you're amazing. I mean, I guess we can make out if you want. So we're looking right here. It's the darker green region, and I believe it's a smaller group of people. Mali is in the Omotic language family. Now on this other map over here, you can see the Omotic language family situated here. So I'm trying to cross-reference these maps in order to locate them. And there's a little bit over 100,000 speakers of Mali. And FYI, the main languages spoken in Ethiopia are Amharic, and it's super cool. If you live in any big city in the United States, you can probably find like a Ethiopian restaurant that has Amharic like writing and signs around the restaurant. I'm pretty sure we have one here in Honolulu, and I remember in Washington, D.C., I also saw one every day on my way to work. The script is pretty distinct, but they also speak English, Oromo, and Somali, and a lot of other languages, of course, but these are some big ones. Now, historically, it looks like the Mali people had a third-gendered person called Ashtime, and these people typically did female tasks and dressed like women, even though they were biologically male. Also, in both Mali and Ndongo culture, it seems like royalty kept these third-gendered people close. Like they were almost privileged, and royalty wanted their company, their expertise, and their services. Now it gets a little fuzzy, but in some of the articles I read, it said, specifically in historical Mali culture, the Ashtime were permitted to sleep with Mali kings in order to preserve the royal bloodlines. In other words, people who were Ashtime couldn't get pregnant, so it was not like there were gonna be any like, oops, babies. And before really important ceremonies or rituals, kings weren't permitted to be around any women, like no women at all. So they turned to the Ashtime. Now, that might sound weird to you, but I don't think this is the only culture in history where male royalty slept with people who did not identify as biological women in order to protect bloodlines. Even here in Hawaii, don't quote me on this, my Hawaiian scholar friend was telling me that pre-colonially in Hawaii, there were men who were referred to as aikane, or they were kind of like friends to the male royals. And the aikane had sexual relations with the male royalty, again, in order to protect the bloodlines. So if you think about it, this is pre-colonial Hawaii, pre-colonial Ethiopia. You know, there was no stigma attached to a man sleeping with a man. It was no big deal. It was Christianity that brought that stigma, and in turn turned most African countries into some of the most hostile places in the world for LGBTQ people. Okay, I can feel myself further digressing here. But if you've lived in a place that's not predominantly Christian, it's a totally different experience. I grew up in a Christian country, the United States of America, but at the age of 21 to 22, I moved to Thailand. I lived there for 1 year, and Thailand is not a Christian country, it's a Buddhist country. Predominantly. I'm not an expert, this is just me talking, but I remember some of my Thai friends telling me that yeah, Buddhism has some conservative values too. It was just a totally different feeling. I mean, it seemed like everybody was so open to this spectrum of gender and sexuality instead of everything being so closed and binary. You know what I mean? Think about it. In Thailand, people are not held to the standard of the Bible. And that changes everything culturally. When you come from a country where the Bible is the standard for morality. Okay, and that's really all I have for Angola and Ethiopia. Honestly, I started looking into Egypt, but it got really difficult. I started reading about how some of the gods, like Hapi, were, represented as non-binary, which kind of tends to trickle down into an ancient acceptance of people who are non-binary genders. I mean, think back to our India video in Ardhanarishvara. Oh my god, 10 points to House Slytherin for remembering that name.
Scared Potter.
But when it came down to the actual people of ancient Egypt and not so much their gods, then my sources got kind of questionable. And so I was like, okay, let me just stick to Angola and Ethiopia. A lot of the readings were kind of focused more on the ancient Egyptians' practices of cross-dressing and not so much on the individuals and their gender, if that makes sense. Anyways, we're gonna end there, kind of. Westerners tend to lump Africa together as if Africa is like one big country. I've done it. I've seen teachers do it before. I've had students who do it before. We've all done it. And that sucks. And to be honest, in researching Africa, it was kind of devastating to find such an erasure of history about non-binary people. I mean, don't get me wrong, I mean, they get erased everywhere. My Native America video was almost as difficult as this one, but it was just a little bit overwhelming about just how little there was written. And as far as videos on YouTube, like nothing. Now, don't get me wrong, I mean, there were plenty of like starting points. It seems like in every article, it was like a list. It was just like, this tribe has a third gender, and this tribe has a third gender, and this one too, and this one too. Here's a name, here's a name. But there was like no details, there was no depth. And then it was really hard to check sources. And then any of the like kind of written evidence came from like the journals of these like Portuguese or French colonizers that are like roughly translated. You know what I mean? So where I wanted to focus on just like one region or one country, you know, kind of give it like that respect. But I still ended up lumping, you know, two countries together in one video. So what I'm trying to say is, that's a clef sentence. If you guys have any books to recommend, if you find anything, if you know anything, like, let me know, please. Now, we can't forget about oral histories. You know, these kinds of anecdotes and research and all of that, you know, it can come from oral history too. I just don't have access to that. I don't know any Ethiopians. I don't know any Angolans. And then today, being anywhere on the LGBTQ spectrum in most African countries is illegal. It's dangerous. It's really bad. I mean, with the exception of South Africa, it just seems like so much support is needed in this area and representation more than anything. So there's a lot of work to do for our African sisters and brothers, queens and kings. Okay, thank you guys for hanging out with me. I'm like really emotional this week. I don't know what's going on. In researching this video, most of these articles really started to drive towards the point of how hostile it is for LGBTQ people in Africa. And I was just reading about all the names and the horrible things that the leaders of these countries were calling gay and lesbian people. They're just totally disgusted by us, like unimaginable, unthinkable. And it was hard to read, but we will carry on and continue the cause and learn some English along the way. And final note, also, don't forget, don't get it twisted, I may teach English, but that does not mean that I think English is the most important language in the world. It is not.
No ma'am. No ma'am.
Some days I hate the fact that I teach the #1 language of colonization, but I teach it as an additional tool. I believe every single language on this earth is just as important as the others. Every language should be treated with respect, preserved is important, all of that. No matter your English level, your native language is just as important. Your indigenous languages are just as important and should be spoken, and you should be proud of them. And if you have an accent when you speak English, there is nothing wrong with that. And with that, your feel-good session with this English hoe is over. You're probably like, thank God, Mike was a lot in this video. So I'll see you next time. Can you guess where we're going? Woo!